I've slowly been making progress here on the Old Town Square stern, so I thought I'd make another video. My last video, I showed the method that I was using for stripping interior varnish, and I was mostly through my first pass over the interior of the hull. I have now finished stripping the varnish from the interior of the hull and have made 2 complete passes over the entire interior with the stripper and the afterwash. So here's how this interior looks, having been stripped. You can see the wood is now all bare. Here's the transom. You can see where that floor grate or floor rack was. And of course, that's to be expected, just the way that the wood saw light and exposure over time. It makes sense that that would still show. In the end, it won't really matter that we have this discoloration here because that floor rack will go back in and it will completely cover it up. The other thing is, after I get through the final cleaning and sanding in here, that'll probably fade away even more. Again, stern seat is out. Just these 2 middle seats are here in the boat. The vertical supports underneath these seats have been removed, which gave better access to stripping down at the keelson. And then looking up to the bow here, everything is stripped off, including the mahogany deck up front there. I also started kind of testing out sanding on this gunnel, and using the sander with 120 grit kind of worked my way up. And you can see that cleaned off the rib tops really nice. So there's going to be a nice contrast between the cedar and the mahogany when this gets refinished. This used to look like this, where the rib tops were all dark and things were not as cleaned up. So this has not seen any sanding yet. On the other side, what I did was just kind of for a trial. I started with a little stripper on the transom down in there and through there where the motor would mount. There was no paint behind the metal plate that came off of the transom here. That was just varnish. This transom originally, I think, was just varnished finished and then was later painted, and then the paint had chipped and there were spots where you could even see, like if I come in a little closer here, you can see some of the spots where past paint had chipped away and it had been repainted. So there are many layers on this. This is what I'm going to be working on now, as well as stripping the keel. To do this, I'm going to roll the boat over. I figure it's easier to deal with stripping the paint off the keel down here while it's still on the boat rather than a loose floating piece, because in order to get the canvas off, I actually need to remove that keel. All the screws holding it on are in here. So I don't really want to get into undoing all that until I've got it stripped down to bare wood. And I'm thinking I got to strip it so that it will hold the new finish. Rolling this over is a careful process. I'm going to roll it toward the outside wall. So I'm going to move the bow all the way over like this. Then I'll bring the stern over and start the roll. I've done that operation a couple of times. It's not too bad, but this boat does weigh over 200 pounds. So you do have kind of a long, awkward object as it's getting rolled over. But fortunately, you can do it in a slow, controlled manner, kind of working from the 2 ends and then supporting it in the middle. And just in case anyone thought you could strip the interior without having to replace the canvas, you cannot. This was not loose and bulging away like this before I went through there with the stripper and the afterwash. So that solvent just breaks down everything when it seeps through the gaps between the planking. I, of course, had no choice. This canvas was torn up here. It's also kind of torn down at the stern as well. Plus, with all the layers of paint on here, this cracking, there is no solution to that other than new canvas. The external stem is already off the boat. That wrapped around and covered over where all of the canvas tacks are, where this canvas is wrapped and folded over here at the bow. So the external stem is over on my bench. Here's the end of the keel, and this is the thin end of the keel. It gets gradually deeper as you work toward the stern. So this obviously is all caked up with layers of paint. What I would like to do is try and strip that paint off, get it back to bare wood, or at least close to it, before I take the keel off the hull, and of course do that transom as well. So I'm gonna start applying some stripper on here, let it sit, soak into that paint, start working, and see what we can get off. In the time lapse, you probably noticed that I kept going over the transom and the keel with the stripper. It's a hot day and I'm trying to make sure that there's kind of a thick coating of that stripper on the wood so it doesn't dry out and it's able to keep working, because you kind of need it to be wet and goopy in order to scrape things up. You can see by looking at this transom, the paint is blistering up. Now, the question is, how much am I going to get off with this pass? And that's what remains to be seen. So I'm going to go ahead and begin scraping this off. On the interior with the varnish, I was using just plastic scrapers. Here, I'm actually going to use a metal putty knife. I happen to know that that does work just a little bit better from the seats where I was trialing things out before I stripped the interior. The issue is you do run the risk of leaving a scratch or a gouge. With the cedar ribs and planking, I don't have a lot of wood to work with there, so a scratch or a gouge could become permanent. Here, with this transom, I have the ability to sand and kind of make scratches or gouges disappear a little bit. The other thing is, this transom is solid mahogany, so it's a harder wood than the cedar from the ribs and the planking. So I'm gonna work with the metal putty knife, and I'm going to work carefully. Let's see what we get up here. So the wood grain is running side to side. So it looks like we're getting off a layer of paint. We're not getting down to that underlying varnish. At this point, I've done 3 applications of stripper on the transom and 2 on the keel. The transom is really starting to clean up toward the wood, or at least toward the varnish base under the paint. The keel, there's still a long way to go. I think I need at least 1 more application of stripper on the transom and probably a few on the keel. You can see the keel just didn't come off nearly as much as the transom did, with the exception of this spot up in here. I think a lot of that is due to the fact that the transom had the varnish underneath, and I don't think the paint was adhering as well to the varnish, but the layers of paint here on the keel were just applied to bare wood, and they seem to be adhering really well. And there are a lot of layers of paint here, thanks to my great-grandfather, who supposedly put a coat of paint on this boat pretty much every year. As the paint is coming off, I do see the damage from outboard motor clamps here in this region of the transom. And then we also have right there's kind of a gouge. That was completely hidden, but now it's exposed. So the issue is gonna be, do I get some kind of mahogany colored filler so that I can keep this transom bright? And what do I do in addition to the metal plate that was here? Do I get something that's a little beefier than the thin piece that was here? Or do I actually put a wood block here that makes this a little bit thicker, but ultimately protects that underlying mahogany? So those are decisions for down the road. I'm out of time for working on this today, so I'm gonna have to leave this where it is. I did not use any of the afterwash yet, and that is because I haven't got this down to bare wood, so I really am not trying to clean away residue at this point. I'm still trying to get the bulk of these old finishes off, particularly that green paint. So until I actually get those finishes off such that it scrapes away nearly bare, I don't see any point in wasting the afterwash. So another application or so of the stripper on the transom, scraping it away, and then we're probably going to be ready for the afterwash there. But on the keel, we still have a ways to go.